when we're ready.
Yeah, I just hit it.
Okay.
So, should be good.
All right. Thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, Jason. Have a good night. And we are already streaming on YouTube.
Good evening.
How are you?
This is Jim.
Hear you.
All right.
Okay, our YouTube issue is resolved. We are actually live streaming already. We are live streaming now. So we don't have to start the meeting, but I just want to let you know that we are live streaming.
Perfect.
So the screens aren't on. Yep, the TVs aren't on. Okay.
I'm going to give it another minute, Bill. Looks like we're missing a few folks.
Okay. Sounds good.
Them people. Wasn't nobody.
It should be. Well, sir. Okay. Thank you.
So you want this to go up there? Yes. Okay. So,
Okay, well, why don't we get started? Welcome to the Comprehensive Rezoning and Update Task Force meeting.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
we're still having some internet issues here. We can't get
Okay.
all the members. We can't get all the members connected to Teams.
Okay, I'll just hold. You let me know when you're connected.
Thank you. How are we doing, Carla? We're good to go?
We're good?
Madam
Okay.
Chair, we're good to go.
Great. So welcome to the Comprehensive Rezoning and Update Task Force meeting. We want to take a moment to welcome Tyler Brown, our newest member of the Planning Commission and member of the task force. So welcome, Tyler.
All right, thank you. Appreciate
And
it.
when I call your name, just let me know that you're here if I don't see you. Al Nickerson. Bill Norris.
Here.
I see Mr. Sutton. Brian Greenwood.
Here.
Buck Nickerson.
Here.
Vicky Shawani.
Here.
Cindy Genther. James Saunders.
Here.
Matt Langenfelder. Paul Ruggie. Paul here?
Madam Chair, Paul is not able to be here this evening. He sends his apologies.
Okay, great. Sam Shogi? Don't see Sam. Tom Mason? I see Tom, and I see Mr. Brown. Okay, and I see that Bill and Cindy and Carla and Sandy are with us. So our first order of business this evening is approval of the task force meeting minutes from April 14th. Are there any additions or corrections?
Madam Chairman, I just had a question. The minutes have referenced some people who speaking and others are just references task force members. Kind of confusing. I don't know if there was a policy or why. It's just kind of hard to read the way it was done. But I guess it's on tape. But
Right, and I don't know, Bill, if you can speak to that, why we kind of interchange the two?
Yes, Madam Chair. In some cases, there's items where staff members are reporting out and those staff members are identified. But in general, the minutes are intended to be an ideas-based approach, so that instead of identifying a specific member by name who said an idea, the idea is that the ideas are the focus. And since we're trying to work towards consensus, I'm trying to focus on the ideas that are expressed as opposed to who expresses them. That's helpful.
Got it, got it. Are there any additions or corrections?
move to approve.
Great, so hearing none, we'll accept the minutes as submitted. And the next
Madam
item.
Chair,
second.
Yeah.
we needed a second on that.
I second it. James Saunders second it.
Yes, thank you, James.
Okay, go ahead.
The next item on the agenda, we're going to move to the public forum, and Bill is going to walk us through an overview of the rezoning and update process. And we'll talk about the summary text changes that have been submitted from January through April 14th. And then we'll open up the floor for public comments, starting with folks on the phones, then folks on Teams, and then folks in person. So Bill, I'll turn it over to you at this point.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Okay. I'd like to welcome everyone to the second public forum for comprehensive rezoning update. Before we open up the floor for public comment, I want to touch briefly on some general information for members of the public who may be watching and may not be familiar with this process. What is zoning? Zoning is a regulatory process that divides all land into different districts based on primary uses of the land. For example, low-density residential, or commercial, or industrial. And I'd like to note that in this case, Kent County zoning only addresses unincorporated properties. So for people with properties located in one of our 5 towns, this process wouldn't apply. A zoning code can establish an ideal property size for each district based on the expected uses and the desire to allow for separation between uses. The code then provides for setbacks based on that ideal property size, as well as other standards, such as environmental protection and aesthetics. Finally, using a map, the code places every property in a community into a zoning district using that map. So what is comprehensive rezoning? Comprehensive rezoning is a review of the entire existing zoning code, both the text and the map. In Kent County's process, any member of the public can request text changes, and any property owner can request a new zoning district for their own property or properties. All requests will be evaluated by the task force and reviewed on their merits. Why now? In general, a comprehensive rezoning process follows the adoption of a new comprehensive plan. Kent County adopted its new comp plan in April 2018. And Kent County's last major update of its zoning code was completed in 2002. So it's time. How is the zoning code being reviewed? Kent County's process utilizes a national consultant to provide broad zoning expertise, while the local team here will manage advertisements, logistics, meetings, and minutes. And this task force, gathered together tonight, gives both guidance and recommendations on the product and the process. Our task force is comprised of the full Planning Commission and 9 community members, all of whom wear many hats and bring together many perspectives. What is Kent County's 2-part process? The first part is the review of the zoning code text itself, all the districts and all the language in the text. The second part is review of the zoning code map, where the county will entertain all proposals by property owners who submit them. And finally, the task force will put together recommendations that will be forwarded for use in the legislative process in 2002. Our calendar at the moment looks as follows. Right now, we're working on requests for specific text changes, and that's what the public forum is about this evening. Over the summer, we'll be looking at a general text review. In the fall, zoning map changes will be reviewed. And then in January and February, the task force will review a final package and make final recommendations. How are members of the public involved? Tonight is part of a 2-part cycle within the specific text change component. The task force has been reviewing proposed requests for text changes, and tonight's public forum is for public comment on the requests that we've received. The task force will then, at a future meeting, give general recommendations regarding those requests, and there will be another public forum for public comment on the task force recommendations. To summarize the content of those text changes, tonight's public forum will allow for public input on what has been discussed regarding specific text changes. And those requests fall into 2 categories. Requests for text changes submitted by the public are included on the January 14th agenda, and requests for changes are related to when sheds are allowed, considering more utility scale solar, adding a mixed use zone, adding more uses to various districts, reviewing lot coverage standards, reviewing setbacks, reviewing density standards, and more. Altogether, there were a dozen requests. The other item for review is requests for text changes submitted by the task force. Those are embodied in the April 14th agenda, and they're repeated again on the agenda tonight. Those requests include items such as reviewing setbacks related to animal husbandry uses, reviewing farm size and subdivision potential in AZD, reviewing non-conforming uses and structures, reviewing allowed pier length, reviewing buffer standards in various buffers, reviewing the definition of structure, reviewing waterfront regulations regarding yards and setbacks, and review of corner lot regulations, accessory structures, and deadlines for submittals. Altogether, there were 18 requests. I appreciate the time given to me to give this brief explanation. If anyone in the public wishes to reach out to the department, you can reach us at our email at commzone@kentgov.org. You can visit our website at county.com/compzone, and you can reach us by telephone at 410-778-7423. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Bill. Now we'd like to open it up for public comments, and can basically comment on anything that we've discussed from the beginning of this process up till now. We request that you limit to about 5 minutes per person, and ask that you state your name clearly for the record and speak directly into the microphone for the recording. So we're going to start with folks on the phone. Is there anyone on the phone that would like to make a comment?
Yeah, hi, this is Kyle Kirby. I'm an attorney at McLeod Law Group, and I represent the several property owners at Millington Crossing, which is at the intersection of US 301 and State Route 291. It's at the edge of Millington at a big intersection. And we've been working with several landowners to collectively try to plan this growth area and give input to the rezoning process. We currently represent 7 properties controlling about 600 acres, approximately 600 acres. And despite the challenges with the Zoom meetings and COVID and the schedule, our property owners think this is a very important process, and they've been very actively involved in trying to promote economic growth, smart growth in this area. And we recently submitted a proposed text amendment which would provide for mixed-use zoning at this Millington Crossing area. And the comprehensive plan has targeted this exact area and this specific interchange as the location for future growth, making the approximate 600 acres controlled by our clients the largest cooperative economic development area in the county. And the significance of this rezoning as it pertains to our clients in this area, the longevity of the county, economic growth, smart growth, diversity in housing, things like that, the significance cannot be taken lightly. It can't, this rezoning process is very, very important for this particular area and for the health of the county. And I'd like everybody to take a close look at the mixed-use zoning area. What we've proposed, it would mix commercial uses, which a lot of that is already zoned for, with some housing allowances and housing options. And with that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce Jim Constantine, who is our client's principal planner. And Jim works with LRK, which is an architecture, design, and planning firm with locations all across the United States. They're a premier firm for smart growth, historic preservation, master planning and well thought out development tailored to areas like Kent County, rural areas as well. And Jim's been a licensed professional planner for decades. He's operated in more than 30 states, and he spent a lot of time analyzing the Millington Crossing area and the zoning code and what would be most appropriate for this area and for Kent County as a whole. So I'd like to have Jim Constantine sort of explain to the task force our specific rezoning request, which is for mixed-use zoning in this particular area.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great, thank you. I don't know if you can see me or not, but thank you. Good evening. I'm Jim Constantine from LRK. We're architects, designers, and planners based in Philadelphia. The land surrounding the interchange of routes 301 and 291 is an opportunity for the county to rezone and implement the county comp plan, something that Mr. Mackey referenced in his overview presentation, and to avoid what one finds at the typical highway interchange: uninspired, planned, scattered sprawl. This interchange is positioned to become the gateway to Maryland's eastern shore with the proposed Bay Country Welcome Center by the state of Maryland. Recent improvements to Route 301 in both Delaware and in Maryland with the state's ongoing program to eliminate grade crossings. Designation of Route 301 as an alternate relief route and bypass to State 95, and the upcoming improvements to the Bay Bridge crossing. Critically, your 2018 Kent County Comprehensive Plan identifies this specific location for priority growth, expanded regulatory flexibility, which is important to this effort, and to support commercial and mixed-use development, which is really at the core of what we've proposed as a rezoning here, as a mixed-use base zone. The existing zoning along both sides of Route 301 at the interchange is fragmented in multiple zoning districts. There's illogical, jagged district boundaries that are based on property lines, good planning. And so using the comp plan as a guide to support expanded regulatory flexibility to promote mixed use at this location, we've submitted a rezoning request to create a mixed use base zoning surrounding the interchange that would encompass all of the 600 acres owned by these multiple owners. A mixed-use zone at this location can help advance the county comp plan goals for economic development by creating jobs, increasing services, expanding the diversity of housing choices for the citizens of the county. Coordinating the land surrounding this interchange into a single new mixed-use zoning district is designed to guide and coordinate smart growth, and it would be highly consistent with your comp plan at this specific location. It would also be better enable a mix of uses on multiple properties among different owners that can respond to the market and make a more efficient use of infrastructure. And in closing, just two other points. This is an opportunity to also advance the principles outlined by your consultant, Calfee Zoning, in the diagnostic report that they presented to this task force last year, in which they state, quote, zoning should respect existing and reflect desired development patterns, close quote, and, quote, zoning should be the implementation of the plan, they were referring to the comp plan, rather than a barrier to achieving the vision, close quote. Finally, the mission statement adopted by this in January states that your mission includes, quote, supporting opportunities for expanding into new economies via innovative and thoughtful changes to county zoning regulations that simplify regulatory processes and add new uses, close quotes. So in conclusion, establishing a mixed zoning district is an opportunity for the task force to do the following: integrate coordinated planning across multiple parcels with cooperation among different landowners, implement the recommendations of the county comp plan and take an action that is completely consistent with your mission statement. Thank you very much, and Kyle and I are available to answer any questions if you have any. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Constantine. Are there other folks that would like to comment from the telephone? Okay, hearing none from the telephone, let's move on to folks on Teams, so not those in the room yet. So if you're joining us via Microsoft Teams, I see that DH has their hand raised. Okay, so hearing no commenters from Teams, let's move on to in person. Is there anyone in person that would like to comment?
Kim, this is Janet Christensen Lewis. Can you hear me now?
Hey, Kim,
Yes.
this is Jim. The gentleman just spoke. What type of future growth are they thinking of having? What is their potential? What are they planning on building or using that land for?
I'll let Mr. Constantine or Mr. Kirby answer that question.
Sure. Under the mixed-use zoning, it would really be potential for things that are proposed in the commercial district, within the industrial and residential uses. So it would be mixed-use development. Obviously, you would need to have provisions in the mixed-use zoning to deal with interrelationships and in some cases perhaps buffering between some of those uses. And mixed-use zoning certainly is the hallmark of smart growth and something that is identified for this location in the county's comp plan.
I think I heard it right. But did I also hear that he said that he was going to deal with both sides of 301?
Correct. The 600 acres that we are referring to includes both sides of 301, although primarily to the east. But for instance, the state of Maryland has a parcel that's on the west side. We're there.
Okay.
Proposing this welcome center.
And this is Kyle Kirby again. Just to clarify, the properties we represent right now, several of them are zoned commercial. They're zoned employment center, which allows for business uses, commercial uses, service industries, things like that. But we also represent property owners right there in the exact same vicinity that are contiguous, that are rural residential and residential districts. So it's not so much different than what is already there. It's just that it allows mixed-use based zoning in this area would allow the rural the residential uses to be placed over the commercial uses that are existing, as well as the commercial uses to go over to the residential properties that are next door. So it's just essentially making the area a little bit more flexible. So there's smart growth available in this area, which has been designated for the premier growth area in the county at a big major intersection. So I hope that clarifies a little bit.
Okay, thanks a lot.
I see that Jennifer Debnam has her hand raised. Jennifer, do you want to speak?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to make comment to a few of the changes that were presented in last meeting. I wanted to say that I am in strong support of the 2018 comp plan. Is it echoing terribly?
I don't hear an echo.
Yes, it's echoing.
Maybe if all others are not speaking, if you can mute your microphone.
I think it's echoing through my computer. I'm not sure. It hasn't done it yet. That's good. I can try to call in. Would that be better?
That's fine. I actually don't hear the echo, but if I do, if you'd like to call in, that's fine.
Okay, I'll try that.
Okay. And while we're waiting for Jennifer to call in, just want to check, David Hill, your hand is raised. Is there a comment you'd like to make?
Yeah, sorry. I had a customer stop me. 2 weeks ago, they wanted to push ag now. For me, this is our busiest time. I haven't got home yet. I'm fighting my second COVID shot that I got yesterday. And I'm miserable. You know, getting to what has been spoken to pass, data centers, I thought this was defeated 4 or 6 months ago. Obviously, people are not listening, but it's coming back up. And then one part that I was upset about was resetting the lots again, which is defeating our purpose of going back to keeping the houses close to town, because it's just creating more septic systems and more wells. You know, like I said, I'm not sure if we're supposed to be arguing this stuff or just telling you how we feel, and they're going to come back and discuss it later. But I've been confused on some of the meetings they've had. So with that, I'm just going to move on because I've got to move to a customer waiting for me. Sorry.
Thank you, David. I can say that we will be discussing more fully some of these suggested text amendments. At this time, we've been gathering all the proposed amendments, and we will have more in-depth discussion later on in the process. So let me go back to Jennifer. Thank you. And let's see if Jennifer has rejoined us via the phone. I don't think Jennifer has rejoined us. Is there anyone else?
Now I'm here. I can hear you. I did not hear anything until just a second.
No worries. Please go ahead.
Okay, this is much better. I was hearing myself twice before. I was just calling to say that I wanted to express my support of the 2018 comprehensive plan that expressed strong zoning and protections for the ag zone district while preventing fragmentation of the same district. And the two text changes that I'd like to speak to were number 2, the elimination of the 10% rule, and number 5, the resetting of the parcel density clock, which I feel both of these go against the 2018 comp plan by perhaps causing fragmentation of AZD and putting some lots into the priority preservation area, which was something that is mentioned that we don't want to do. As a alternative, I would suggest that perhaps the rural character zoning is increased because that doesn't have the 10% rule applied, to my knowledge. And it would be effectively encouraging development around towns and existing housing as opposed to anywhere in the AZD, which I think would be a smarter growth plan than allowing it to be anywhere. And then lastly, I'd like to also talk about setbacks on ag structures, particularly ones with animals. And I would have to say that the existing land use ordinance is somewhat confusing on that, as it's listed in multiple different sections and different species and different kinds of structures. So I do think that that could be cleaned up and be more concise and clear for people. But as an owner of a concentrated animal feeding operation, I don't feel that 200-foot setback is far enough away from property lines for an animal structure like that. I think there should be differences based on density. A stable with perhaps a few animals is much different than a large structure with thousands of animals in it. And with that, I appreciate having the time to make comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other comments?
Kim, this is Jennifer Richardson Lewis. Can you hear me?
May I speak? This is John Leisinger on the phone.
Please, John, go ahead.
I want to speak to the proposal from the McLeod law firm that was just presented, along with that from Mr. Constantine. My concern is not so much with development along the corridor, which seems inevitable and perhaps desirable, as limiting unintended consequences. In previous meetings and in this meeting, the proposal has been for mixed-use development without any definition as to what that might be. We've seen some earlier schemes which have components which would be at the very least controversial. My principal concern with regard to the development is on the western side of the highway, and the unintended consequence might be that once extended substantial construction on the west side, how do we address the limits of that development? When and if water were to be provided on that side of the highway, what is to stop the sprawl from extending farther west? How will that development be bounded, and how will it be scaled? Will it be limited to the 600 acres that the group is representing, or will it be a much broader extension into the unincorporated sections of the county, which this would inevitably include? So my concern is that in the previous meetings they talked about planned development and floating zones, and those are terms which in the planning community are not always used and might imply a great deal of latitude in the mixed-use development that, absent definition in the zoning ordinance, could have aspects which the community would find disagreeable. I'm hearing an echo too, so I don't know if you can hear me. But it's really not so. Somewhat I wanted to say is it's not so much opposition to development of that, but making certain that it's strictly bounded and better described than it has been to date.
Thank you. We were able to hear most of what you said.
Kim, this is Jennifer Richardson Lewis. Can you hear me now? Kim, can you hear me?
Other comments?
Kim, can you hear me? Kim, can you hear me?
Yeah, this is Kyle Kirby again. I don't know if it's appropriate for me to speak again, but just to respond to that. One, we've submitted draft legislation regarding the mixed-use zoning, which which defines what uses would be allowed, what would be permitted uses, what uses would require further approval from the Planning Commission or the Board of Appeals, variances, special exceptions. So that should all be in the record. And with regard to west of 301, there's a small portion that we would like rezoned to mixed-use zoning, which would permit commercial and residential use. Everything west of that small sliver, which is 80 acres or even less, everything else over there is zoned agriculture. So it's very limited what can be done to the west of our properties. So I think sprawl is not really a likely consequence of what we're proposing in the area that the comprehensive plan has designated as the premier growth area. So just wanted to clarify those 2 points. The mixed-use zoning proposed ordinances are in the record with the task force and with the county.
Thank you.
Kim, can you hear me now?
Yes.
But can Kim hear me?
Yes, she said yes.
Oh, I can't hear her.
You'll be able to hear. I don't think she said anything.
I'm sorry?
I don't think Kim has said anything. You will hear her if she does.
But does she hear that I'm going to speak?
I hear someone. You're asking me. I do hear you.
Okay, thank you. This is Janet Christensen Lewis speaking. And I thought it was a little disappointing, although he did an incredible job of explaining the zoning that was going on, that he did not explain really specifically that zoning must be consistent with the comprehensive plan. And it's not just taking the comprehensive plan into account. The courts have held that it must be consistent with. Throughout all of the discussion, and I've been at all of the hearings, none of the discussion ever focuses primarily on how these changes would affect the comprehensive plan, or how they would be compatible with the comprehensive plan. And with that, I have a lot of skepticism about some of the changes, particularly those things that are being put forth that would change the land in the agricultural zoning district. And that has to do with the reset. That has to do with data centers. That has to do with the 10% rule. You know, Commissioner Mason has spoken often that agriculture is changing, and he's correct. The idealized farm of yesterday has given way to large agriculture that will leave Kent County behind if land is subdivided, making it impossible to farm efficiently. There has been no data to support that people are buying 20-acre parcels and turning them into some agricultural production other than getting the farmer next door to continue to crop the property in order to obtain the agricultural use assessment to lower their property taxes. While 50% of the farms in the United States are considered small, they account for only 10% of the total output. The way to utilize our land and to attract small farmers that do not have the capital to buy land is to institute a land share program similar to Montgomery County's Land League, which is very successful. And our comprehensive plan talks about this as a way of meeting a goal of supporting agriculture. As far as the 301 corridor goes, the proposal for mixed use, the devil will be in the detail. First of all, even within the zone, the property that is being discussed, there is agricultural land in there, and yet the developer has shown that on that land, he would like to build. On top of that, Kent County is very behind in terms of its forest. It's lost. It's one of the counties that has one of the lowest densities. And the Maryland Department of Planning has already stated that between 210 and 2040, we will lose an additional 800 acres of trees despite the Forest Conservation Act. The 301 corridor, the property on the west side, contains one of the few hubs and corridors of the green infrastructure of Kent County. And the Maryland legislature is currently looking at what is happening to trees. They passed a law for the next 3 years. They're going to be evaluating the hubs and the corridors. And part of the property that has been spoken about on the 301 west side that is going to be developed is treed. It's forested. And in order to do the kind of development that they have proposed in some of the plans that they have put forward, it would mean clear cutting. So when I say the devil is in the detail, what I mean is that land must be protected. Step back. Not every farmer is going to agree with me, but from my perspective, I have a lot of rights as a farmer in Kent County. It's in our law. We have the right to farm, but I don't have the right to make my neighbors miserable. Under the current zoning with 600-foot setbacks, and I do agree with Jennifer that it needs to be cleaned up, because there's a big difference between having 3 horses and having 10,000 chickens or more. But to right now, with a 600-foot setback, that is not in stone. If you work with your neighbor and you get agreement with them, you can have a variance. And as far as I know, all of those variances have been approved. But it requires that you talk to your neighbor, you make sure that they're in agreement with it, and that there's not going to be conflict. I don't think that that's a big price to pay. So I would not like to see that agricultural setback, at least for large operations, manure, and things that are pretty offensive, and large buildings, to be diminished. I think it's difficult to follow the process because a lot of things are being talked about, but the process in which they're going through, where they just discuss it and then it kind of comes and goes, and who knows what's going to happen to it. As a member of the public, trying to keep up with this is very difficult. But thank you for letting me have comments this evening.
Thank you, Janet. And Janet, just to your last point, and Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the idea is that when we finally get to scheduling some of the topics, like scheduling out the rest of the year, it will be maybe easier to follow because we will be able to identify when we are speaking about certain issues in depth. Is that correct, Bill?
Okay, I hope that's true, because so far it's been less than impressive.
Kim, yes, that is true. We will be trying to set a schedule that has more specific topics.
Other comments? Okay, hearing no other comments.
I'd like to comment again. I didn't want to butt in if there were other people. This is Kyle Kirby again.
Okay,
I'd just
Kyle?
like to respond to Janet, and I appreciate Janet's comments. You know, I've lived in Kent County my whole life, and we're an agricultural society. But what Janet said with regard to the land west of 301, all of the 600 acres we're asking to be zoned mixed use, all of it except for 15 acres is zoned something other than agriculture, which is going to allow clear cutting, housing, commercial uses. So there's a little sliver on the west side of 301 that's zoned agriculture. So we're not talking about a big change with regard to enacting this mixed use. It's already there. You can already do all the stuff that she's talking about. It's just we're looking for more flexibility in moving it amongst the parcels. So I just wanted to clarify that, and thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Okay, last call for comments. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Bill, and we're going to start with some old business. We did make it through the list in terms of text changes that had been suggested by the task force. So perhaps we can get started, and then we'll take a break shortly. We'll take a 15-minute break somewhere in the middle, and the rest of the meeting. So, Bill, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. We're on item number 9, which is reviewing elimination of the county's maximum pier length of 150 feet. And I believe the member who suggested this may be ready to speak about this, if that's all right.
Yep, thank you, Bill. This is Buck. Can everybody hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Good. I'm the one who brought this to the table. I do a lot of pier permits in Cecil, Kent, Queen Anne's counties. I do a few in Caroline County. And Kent County has about the most restrictive pier regulations that I encounter. What I kind of want to explain to everybody who's never had to go through the pier permit process is that once we come up with a plan, it goes under review by the state and the Army Corps. There's seven different agencies that we send this permit application off to. It's like marine fisheries and sensitive species and navigation and the wetlands department. And they all have a pretty stringent set of regulations to go by. What happens, the marine contractors used to do their own permits, but they've become so regulated that it's just more than they can handle. Once we get through the state and the federal process, then we come to the county and encounter more regulations to go through. The biggest one being the 150-foot pier length. And there's some inconsistencies with that. In the county, the pier length is limited to 150 feet. State and federal say that it can be 25% of the width of the waterway, and it cannot encroach the channel. But what happens in the town of Chestertown, in the town of Betterton, if you get a local or get the state federal permit, go to the town and say, hey, I need a permit, they say, hey, that's good with us, go. As long as it meets the state and the feds, it's okay with us. Chestertown and Betterton have no further regulations. The town of Rock Hall has their own regulations. It's a little bit different and not completely unreasonable, but the 150-foot pier limit is not there. Another thing that comes into play, if you ever look at the MD Merlin website, you can click on the submerged aquatic vegetation layer, and most of or all of your submerged aquatic vegetation is right along the shoreline, and there's certain limits and restrictions in that. And a lot of times you can go out, if you go out 200 feet, 250 feet, you could get past those to have a platform or a different style boat lift or something like that. So I just those are some of the things that I think. And also, Cecil County has a 300-foot limit on their piers, and Queen Anne's County has a 150-foot limit like Kent County does, but the process to get a variance to go out to 200 to 300 is a lot simpler. Currently, to get a variance in Kent County to go past 150, it's nearly impossible. You have to prove a hardship or practical difficulty. I've done them in Queen Anne's County that were much smoother. Kent County, you have to go to the Planning Commission and then to the Board of Appeals. Like I say, a very difficult process to get. So those are kind of the method to my madness on that one.
This is Pat. I have a question for Buck. Hey, Buck.
Sure.
What is the theory behind the limitation of 150 feet? Do you know?
If I remember correctly, from what I had heard secondhand over when the last time the ordinance was written was for kayakers. That kayakers going along the shoreline had to go out and around the piers. I don't own a kayak. I've been in a kayak, and I've just went right underneath of the pier in a straight line. So I've never really supported that. I never thought that was a valid argument.
Would you like us to proceed?
Yes.
Okay. The next item discusses better defining, establishing a modified buffer. Currently, this is actually an issue that staff also identified. There isn't a way to request additional modified buffer. It's a mapped process. Other counties have processes by which you can apply, and we should probably look at coming up with a process for that. I don't know if members have comments.
This is Buck again, and this is another one of the ones that I had suggested, and it is difficult. I think this rule was drafted and intended for when you have a shoreline and it's just a straight bank right back square to where that building site would be. Well, when you get into an area where you have a ravine or the property lines are not square to the shoreline, it really adds a level of difficulty, and especially with the gray area, there's a lot of interpretation depending on which way you go. So I just, like you'll hear me say on several of these, I really don't care how it's defined. I'd just like to see it much better defined. Defined much better, I should say. Sorry.
Mr. Mackey, do you have an idea of a definition? I mean, I'm missing what needs to change in the definition. Thank you.
I can supply a copy of the definition to the task force. I don't have it with me.
And Joe, this is Carla. It's not so much.
So we are coming up on 7 o'clock. Why don't we take a 15-minute break? We'll adjourn and rejoin at 7:15. And I believe that we don't turn anything off, so just be aware that you might want to mute your microphone if you're going to go about your business. And we'll see you at 7:15.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
somebody in here talking, I can't get that echo, you hear it twice. And I'm not smart enough to keep up with two of them, right? It's not a good system, but unfortunately, it's the hand we were dealt with. It's time to make some corrections. We've gotta have a room somewhere where everybody could space, at the community center or something where everybody can space out. And if if you haven't been vaccinated, then maybe you do go on this, but everybody else ought to be able to.
I think people are choosing to stay home though.
Well, either we've been lied, to, and the vaccination ain't working damn, or we're wasting our time. One of the two. Yeah. Yeah, and I'll tell you that the technology and stuff too, it's good when it works, I guess, but it ain't my cup of tea. You fell asleep up there?
Oh, I'm still awake.
Huh?
I'm still awake.
There's not in church.
Just trying to catch up on all these emails today, which I haven't had time to look at.
How many of them do you get a day for the county commissioner thing?
It all depends. Every time I saw them on here today, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11 so far today.
Kim, hi, it's Cindy Genther. Hey, I apologize. I'm using a different device tonight, but I logged in at 6:04 or 6:05. I've been here and listening, so thank you. I may have missed roll call.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. All right, bye. Oh, well, I'm still here. I'm muting.
Got it.
Kim, this is Albert Nickerson.
Yes.
I couldn't get my microphone to work at roll call either.
Okay. I saw your initials there. I thought you were. Okay, it's 7:15. I think we have everyone back with us. So let's resume the meeting and we'll pick up, I think we're on item 11.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The expanded buffer occurs when there's a steep slope or a ground that is wet. I think it's called hydrophilic soils. And I believe the request is about how to more clearly define that. I think a lot of the responsibility for the area of expanded buffer may fall on design professionals.
Hi, this is Buck again. I wanted to speak about this. And first I wanted to apologize. When this was mentioned, I had expanded buffer and modified buffer confused. The modified buffer is when you can go closer than 1,000 foot, or excuse me, closer than 100 feet to those are in the older subdivisions that were kind of grandfathered in, like Kentmore Park and such. And you're supposed to kind of go by the precedent of what's been said by your neighbors and all that. And like I say, the interpretation is kind of varying on that. The expanded buffer deals with steep slopes. And again, that was what I was talking about when I said that the shoreline is not always parallel with the slope. When you have a ravine or something and you have steep slopes, it just needs to be better defined. The rule is that you're supposed to expand the slope expand the buffer 4 feet for every 1% over 15%. And like I say, that's or to the top of bank, whichever's greater, and that's something that could be a little better defined. I would really like to get some guidance from the Critical Area Commission about that, to see if we could kind of nail that down a little bit better. Since that it's been in law now for some years, and I know they've had some issues. I'm sure they've had issues of where, like I say, it's just not black and white. There's a lot of interpretation there that can vary.
Hi, this is Billy Norris. Can I interject something on this subject? I think it would be a lot easier with people looking at property in the county to be able to have a definition more clearly of all this, in specific knowing what you can and can't do when you have a property that's grandfathered and in the buffer. It would be nice to have a set of guidelines to know what you can and can't do. For instance, if you have an old home that needs to be renovated or torn down or replaced or whatever, there doesn't seem to be any real definition of what you can do. You have to, being a realtor, it's very hard to tell your clients or to guide your clients in order to make an intelligent decision on whether to move forward with something or not, without having a clear set of guidelines. For instance, if we have a house that either needs to be torn down or remodeled, can we remodel within the walls Do we have to leave a wall up if we wanted to replace the house and go from that? Can we use the foundation that's presently there? Could we reduce the size of the structure that's there and build it within the foundation of some sort? It also might be a case where, say, a major storm comes, if we wanted to elevate the property or the house or whatever that's in the buffer. And I just think that we need to have some sort of guidelines in our zoning ordinance that we can express to our clients or to anybody about what you can and can't do. So I would agree with Buck. We need to know, and everybody else seems to be on board with this. We need to know what we can and can't do a little bit more clearly, without having to wait. And sometimes when you wait, you miss out, or you don't. You just don't seem intelligent enough. You can't give an intelligent answer to your customer. So that's my thoughts on that. It'd be nice to clarify some of this stuff. Thank you.
This is Cindy Genther. I completely agree with Bill Norris and his comments, as well as Buck Nickerson's. It is very concerning to a lot of folks who are considering purchasing a property here in Kent County, who are considering major renovations and improvements on properties, to get a better idea of what they could do prior to going through the entire application, building permit application process.
This is Carla. Can anybody hear me now?
Carla, I don't know if you're trying to speak.
I'm gonna leave and come back.
Carla's having technical difficulties with her head. Well, if we're ready, we can move on to structure.
Yeah, let's move on and we can come back to Carla. We have time for comments on that later time. Please.
The item is to review how to better define the term structure as it applies to the establishment of the aforementioned buffers. And I will read the definition of structure from the code currently. Structure is anything constructed or erected, the use of which requires a more or less permanent location on the ground, or attached to something having a permanent location on the ground, including but not limited to mobile homes, signs, swimming pools, fences, gas and liquid storage tanks, backstops for tennis courts, sheds, barns, and pergolas.
So, Carla, would you like to comment on that prior recommendation?
Comment on the buffer, critical area stuff, or on structures?
Whichever. If you want to comment on both, up to you.
No, I was just going to say about the critical area that we clearly recognize that it needs to be updated, and we are already working with the Critical Area Commission to kind of figure out a better way to interpret some of our existing regulations and how we can address them in the new zoning ordinance to make them easier for everybody to understand. And I think Buck might have some comments about this structure term.
Yeah, thank you, Carla. What we get into sometimes with the structure, I believe if you look into or dig deep into the definition of the modified buffer, you go by the neighbor structures. Well, if it's just a house with a deck or something, it's pretty straightforward, but some people have fences that project down to the water. Is the fence considered a structure or not? If I'm not mistaken, in Queen Anne's County, a septic tank is considered a structure. So if you have a septic tank out in the front yard, which is pretty rare, but it does happen, something like that. So that's just what I was kind of alluding to with the definition of structure just to better define it. Maybe it has different definitions in different situations. But just something again that needs to be looked at a little bit more, and maybe relied on Cecil and Queen Anne's counties to how they regulate that to kind of keep it consistent, maybe.
Okay. Are we ready to move on to cottage industry?
Yes.
Okay. The item says to review streamlining the cottage industry process. I will read the definition of cottage industry currently in the code so we know what we're speaking of. It's a family type businesses which employ less than 10 people and who manufacture and or provide services with low impact to the surrounding area and residents. For example, low traffic volume, no heavy, noisy, or environmentally disruptive machinery to perform tasks, little or no outdoor storage. Often, home-based industries utilize telecommunications networks. Cottage industries include, but are not limited to, plumbers, electricians, carpenters, and other tradesmen.
And I'll add that cottage industries require a special exception that goes before the Board of Appeals and with a recommendation from the Planning Commission. So it can be a longer process.
This is Buck Nickerson again, and I apologize for talking all the time this evening, but these are all things that I had brought up. I have personally been through the cottage industry process to have my surveying business at our property in Langford. And it was about a 3 or 4 month process by the time we went to the Planning Commission to get concept approval and a favorable recommendation. Then we went to the Board of Appeals. Then we came back to the Planning Commission, and luckily we were able to receive preliminary and final approval. But what happens with those are monthly meetings, and there's this kind of alludes into another one. Basically, if you come out of the Board of Appeals to go to Planning Commission, you only have a little short window to make all the adjustments and everything you need. And in order to have my pole building here for me to run my business out of my house, just so everybody knows, I had to do a pretty robust site plan, had to do a landscaping plan, a stormwater plan, sediment control plan, all in the same time. I had to prove that the building was screened from the road. Luckily, we had existing trees. Then I had to post a bond for the landscaping, post a bond for the stormwater management. If I had to charge somebody to do this and all the hours I had preparing this, it would be several $1,000s. And I think I had another couple $1,000s in the bonds. And when somebody's trying to start a business, that's money they don't have. You know, that's money that they could be put towards other things or something they don't have. So when I say streamlining it, I was, maybe we don't bond the stormwater or bond the landscaping or speed up the process a little bit. And as far as going through maybe just one Planning Commission meeting and one Board of Appeals, or maybe not be a special exception where you don't have to go through the process of Board of Appeals. But I think there's a lot of room for improvement there.
Buck, can you hear me?
I'm here.
You stated that you had to go through all of that to start your business?
Yeah, I already had a business, but at the time I was working out of my old house, and it was just me. And I think at the time I had 2 employees, and to move here and to be all legal, those were all the steps that I had to go through to have my pole building here.
That process like that has to change. That is ridiculous. To have to go through all of those changes just to just to get your business.
I agree.
I can't believe that. Who wrote those rules?
I'm not sure.
Well, we need to, as a task force, we need to go back in and dig and get these rules set up where it's much easier for a person and much easier for anybody to understand what's going on. This is out left field somewhere.
That's always been one of my requests, is to have a flow chart or a checklist or something. So if somebody comes into planning and zoning and says, hey, I want to start up a business at my house, that you can have a checklist and say, okay, here's all the steps you have to take. Here's a flow chart to help you through the system, and all of that.
I remember, I think you came to the planning board back then, didn't you?
Yep, I was there twice.
Yes, you were.
The first trip, I got a concept site plan approval, and I got a favorable recommendation to go to the Board of Appeals. Then I went to the Board of Appeals, got approval, and then I came back to the Planning Commission a month or so later for a final site plan. I got preliminary final at the same time, and that was mostly because I had all my ducks in a row. But if you had somebody that didn't know the process like I do, and maybe had a neighbor that was concerned and wanted a little additional screening or a little additional information, it could have been stretched out over 3 or 4 months of, gathering the information, preparing the plans and such.
It could have been stretched out over 2 or 3 months, but it also could have been the fact that the person that want to go in business had to go through all that, decided, I'm not going to do this business.
Absolutely.
And we'd be losing out that way.
So
I think that we need to take a look at this.
This is Cindy Genther. I agree with Jim. I agree with Buck. The majority of our businesses here in Kent County start out small, like the cottage industry businesses. We need to make this easier for all those businesses to start up. So whatever we can do to streamline this, I'm all in favor.
This is Billy Norris again. I want to interject a few things on this subject. I agree with Cindy, I agree with Jim, and I agree with Buck. There also seems to be some confusion within the county having to do with covenants and restrictions within certain neighborhoods that stipulate something, what you can and can't do, but there's no enforcement of that. So, for Buck to have to go through all those steps in order to get his business at his house, I believe there's numerous other places dotted around the county where people are working out of their house would probably have no permit at all to do so. And I think that some of these places don't have any homeowners association or like a neighborhood. The homeowners association is dissolved. Well, it's my understanding and my experience from past deals and putting together subdivisions or whatever, that the county, I believe, requires covenants and restrictions for the most part. So if the county isn't going to enforce the covenants and restrictions, then why are they requiring them to be there? And I may be wrong on that. I don't know. But I believe that there are certain guidelines that the county requires. There's other issues with the same thing, which might go with hunting. Certain places are designated a preserve. Well, if there's nobody within that subdivision where that preserve is to enforce that you can't go hunting there, then who enforces that? So I think this all comes together under the same umbrella to try and neaten up some of this stuff and figure out really who is the enforcement and what is the process to do what you want to do on your property. Thank you.
Billy, one thing that maybe is unclear is that, like, when I was working down in Chesapeake Landing out of my house on my dining room table and had no employees, I was perfectly legal under, there's another term for it, like home occupation. I was totally legal under home occupation. It's when I started having employees show up and potentially customers come to the house is when it bumped me up from a home occupation to a cottage industry.
Okay, well, I agree with that, but when your employees come to your house and leave their cars there, and then get in the company van, or when you come home in your work truck and you have a trailer behind it for whatever you're doing. Look, I am not anti-business, believe me. I think you should be able to do some of that stuff, but I'm concerned about the enforcement aspect of it. If you buy into a neighborhood and there's covenants and restrictions, somebody other than the homeowners association or somebody should have something to lean on to enforce these rules that we're guided by. So I understand what you're saying about a home occupation, but if we've got rules, we got to enforce them. And if we can't enforce them, then it gets carried away and it causes dissension within the neighborhood. Or in your case, if you have to go through what you went through and somebody else doesn't have to go through it, then that's not correct. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. So that's only my thoughts on it. Somehow it's got to be channeled into the same regiment that everybody goes through, either looser or tighter. I don't know, but it simplifies things.
Madam Chair?
But do all the people that's in this business in Kent County, small business, do they know the procedure of what you went through? No.
No, I don't think so.
No. I know so. I know for a fact that the procedure you went through, that these other small business did not go through this. I can name 5 of them on my hand. So it's not fair to you. So this is not fair. We got to get it where it's be fair to everybody in the county.
I agree.
I think we have
Okay.
we need to address the streamlining of the cottage industry process. Bill, do you want to move on to the next?
Oh, we can, Madam Chair. I would like to make a comment about enforcement, if that would be permitted.
Please.
So all of these things that we're discussing are not created equal. When there are provisions recorded on a plat, that's a county plat, those are some of the things that the county might be able to enforce. When there's approvals issued by the Planning Commission or the Board of Appeals, those are enforceable by the county. Items included in homeowners associations agreements, deed restrictions, covenants, those are considered private agreements. They're a separate matter under law, and we do not have the purview to enforce those. The proper enforcement is often a suit by a member of the homeowners association. I understand there could be third-party suits, but primarily enforcement is by membership. It's like a private agreement. And our next item is reviewing waterfront regulations. Currently, the waterfront side of a property is considered the front yard, and the requester mentions this causes issues such as pools are not allowed in the front yard since the road is now considered the rear yard, and accessory sheds can be 5 feet from the road. There is language that creates that situation where all waterfront parcels, the front yard is considered the water, and there are a number of applications for things like variances and special exceptions that are required to accommodate the sorts of things you would expect in a backyard that are now considered in the front yard.
I work in, like I say, 3 or 4 counties, and Kent County is the only one who considers the waterfront to be the front yard. And so many people buy a waterfront house and then want to put a pool in. Well, then they have to go for a variance for that. And then you can go right up on Turner's Point Road and see some sheds that are like 5 feet off the road, and they're perfectly legal. And to me, that kind of sets up a dangerous thing as far as for theft and things like that. So it just seems to be convoluted. And if we want to keep the waterfront to be the front yard, I think we need to put an exception in there that pools are allowed on the waterfront side or in the front yard, and maybe do something with sheds to get them a little further off the road than 5 feet.
I ain't understood that right. So the county is saying that the waterfront property is the front yard?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Who come up with that idea? The waterfront property is the front yard. And now, and you said something about a pool, Buck?
Yeah, if what happens currently, the regulations say you can't have a pool in the front yard. The pool has to be in the rear yard, to create privacy. Well, because the waterfront's considered the front yard, technically you're not allowed to have a pool between your house and the water. So you have to go for a variance. And I've done several pool variances. I've never ever been denied one for any reason. So it's just one of those things that if it's a slam dunk to go get a variance for a pool, then why bother with the regulation?
Okay. Okay.
We ready for the next one? So the next one is to review size limitations on accessory structures which are currently limited to 1,200 square feet in most properties under 5 acres. This could be enlarged to at least 2,000 square feet as long as stormwater management and screening regulations are met. This is another one. We require a special exception for structures over 1,200 square feet, and we do see quite a few of those throughout the year. I know that in 1989 it was 1,000 square feet, and then it was raised to 1,200 square feet, thinking that might address the need for large sheds, and it seems like people still want even larger sheds than they did 20 years ago. And I guess I would add that kind of the reason it's a special exception on smaller properties is again to make sure that the shed, the garage, won't have a negative effect on neighbors who might be close by. Obviously, on a larger property, then you've got more space and it might have the same impact. And so I think, again, there might be a reason to increase it or to change how the regulations work.
Something we need to keep in mind with that too, when the 1,200 square foot limitation was implemented, there was really no stormwater management regulations like there are now. And when you, so if you want to put in a 2,000 square foot building, for example, you have to meet stormwater management or could have to meet stormwater management, which keeps it further off the property lines in case you had to put dry wells or something like that along the one side. So the regulations are different today than they were when the 1,200 foot was implemented.
Bill, I see that we're coming up on 7:45. I'm wondering if we should pause for comments from the public at this point? Just fearing that we might not get through the agenda.
I think that's a good idea, Madam Chair.
So if anyone would like to comment on what we've been discussing, just the recommendations, we'd like to hear from you. Okay, hearing no comments.
Yes.
Do we have one?
Can you hear me?
Yes?
Sorry, this is Janet Christensen. I had a couple of, I think, more questions than comments. At what point are accessory sheds going to be too large? I mean, we keep expanding how large they can be. 2,000 square feet is larger than many people's homes. So it's like putting a second home on your property. I'm not quite sure that that's what we want to do. And also on the waterfront, in terms of, is pools the only thing that's not allowed in the front yard? Can you answer that?
No. Any accessory structure requires a special exception in the front yard of a waterfront parcel.
Okay, so if I pay a lot of money to have a beautiful view of the water, I'm not sure that it increases my property value to be looking at somebody's shed or their naked bodies in front of their pool, in their pool. I really think that needs to be looked at, only because if it requires a variance, again, it's one of those procedures that adds time for the homeowner, or for the property owner, but it ensures that the neighbors are like okay with it. And, you know, if you set it up some other way for it to be by right, you're going to get into conflict galore. So I just think that's something to consider. And I did have one question regarding the public comments that we had earlier, which is not on this particular issue. Are the public comments, people are given time to talk, they get their 5 minutes or whatever, and then we move on? Or is it a discussion between the people that are having public comment, so that somebody makes a public comment and then somebody rebuts the public comment? And if they rebut the public comment, can the person that gave the comment that's being rebutted then rebut it? I'm talking specifically about Mr. Kirby and his interference, which I found to be not in the spirit of public hearing.
I'm going to try to answer that and then turn it over to Bill, Janet, but I think the public forum is really to encourage discussion. And so I think it can be either that folks are commenting on an individual recommendation, or that there is back and forth.
Okay, I didn't know that those were the rules, or else I would have had some back and forth. So it's nice to know that that's what's going to be in the public hearing forum.
Bill, do you want to add anything there?
He can't talk because I have his... Sorry.
We are having some audio issues in the room, and Mr. Mackey does not have a headset.
This is Kyle Kirby. Not to cut Bill off, but while he's getting himself together.
Yeah, let's let Mr. Mackey please address the question.
He's trying to get connected.
Yeah.
You hear me, Madam Chair?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to say, I think that the public forum can act in a number of ways. Oftentimes, when there are multiple speakers, there is dialogue. I think if the group wishes to limit that, they could, but I don't think that that's atypical, if that's helpful.
I think that answers my question in that in the future, you should be able to respond unless somehow the rules are going to change, which is not what I understood a public hearing to be. So thank you.
Well, I think the difference, Janet, might be that, right, this is a public forum, so I think it's a little less formal than what we would have, say, in a planning commission meeting, which would be a public hearing.
Yes.
And as Bill said, since we're trying to just promote, discussion, I think, we'll let it proceed both ways. And if it gets out of hand, we'll have to put parameters around it so that we can make it through the process.
Madam Chair, this is Sam Shoke. I think going down that road could potentially add some severe complications to this overall dialogue and conversation. It has the chance to really get bogged down in this back and forth, especially between members who weren't selected by the county commission to be on the task force. So I think we should think long and hard about this before we just open up the floor for a back and forth conversation. Because from experience, especially with topics like this that have legislative ramifications, there are going to be a lot of very passionate people with very passionate opinions. And that will, I think, really bog down the overall conversation, especially at this stage where it's mostly just gathering input from the public with regards to what specifically they want to see changed. I mean, if there's an opportunity to add clarification, that's one thing, but it can escalate pretty quickly, and I don't want to see these meetings get bogged down by a back and forth dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. So are there other comments from the public at this time?
Madam Chairman, I have a question for staff as we move on. The process has not been really clearly defined. We talked about defining parameters. Now we're talking about specific uses. Is there a way, I guess when the commissioners hired our consultant, I assume they saw products of what they've done, a comp plan or a land use ordinance from a small rural county or something like that. I guess maybe you have that, but could we forward what they've done somewhere so we can see what the end product may look like? Because we're moving in different areas here, not very clearly what we're doing in some respects. We're changing definitions, land use definitions, and we're zoning changes, but I'd like to see what the product would look like.
I'm happy to provide you with a copy of that.
Just a link or something like that would be great.
We actually talked with the consultant this week about providing a really good relevant example. There were a number in the package, and one of those is a relevant example. And to go over the process, we're not, quote, making changes now. We're going over those topics that the public have raised, that they wish to have discussed, and the task force members have raised and wish to have discussed. This is specific text changes, and we asked folks to send us things that they wanted to have us look at. So that's really what we've been focused on. And we did look at the graphics for the plan as a start with the consultant. So if that helps.
I understand that, Bill. I do. I guess my question is, we've only looked at changes without recognizing components of our land use ordinance that were satisfactory to many people. That's my concern. You give more weight to specific changes, and a lot of them mentioned tonight are great. I have no problem with that, but we need to recognize some of the heart of some of the stuff we had was very positive before too. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Bill, just a clarification, since you didn't have your microphone when I spoke earlier.
Yes.
But the idea is that we will go into a further discussion on these recommendations as we move through the process. And to Sam's point, we should think about maybe we want to preserve back and forth discussion for that part of our process so that we can make it through the recommendations and just solicit input on recommendations without the back and forth at this time.
Okay. I'm happy to poll members for that. Also happy to poll members about discussion topics for upcoming meetings. That might be a helpful way to get through the schedule.
I think
we
that's
can
a great
publish
idea.
something. Yeah. Thank you.
So we are at 7:56. I don't know, Bill, if we should move on to something, or if we should wrap for the evening. I'm afraid that we're going to get into something and not complete it.
Right. Well, we only have 2 items left. One is about the setback for buildings containing animals, and I think we've had really a good discussion on that already. And that leaves one item on reviewing timelines, and I think we can probably do that at another meeting. So what I will be looking for from members, if members can send me topical discussions that they'd like to have between now and the end of June, we'll try to schedule those for the next 3 meetings. And within those 3 meetings, we'll be looking for recommendations only on the specific text changes. And we'll get you a copy of a model document from the consultant so you can see what their work looks like. And I'll try to come up with a cogent description of how we're proceeding. Does that sound good?
Yes. All right. So we should adjourn the meeting. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, if there any opposed? All right, well, thank you for your discussion this evening. Our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Kim, can you
All right.
stay on 1 second?